Welcome to the Travel Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Vandenberg. On our show, I interview and connect with leaders across travel, hospitality, and tourism. We talk leadership in our industry, what has shaped them, the successes, failures, and everything in between. Today, I'm speaking with Dorothy Dowling, consultant with Introspect Strategic Advisors. Well, it's wonderful to have you here today. Thanks for joining me.
Rachel, it's a real honor to be with you. I really enjoyed listening to some of your other individuals that you have interviewed. So I am delighted to be joining such a remarkable group of people.
Thank you. And I always like to provide a little bit of context on where I've met people. And, we've had the pleasure of working together through the Women in Hospitality Leadership Alliance, which is a collective of more than 30 women in hospitality leadership organizations. It's been such an inspiring experience. And we both wear other hats in which we represent organizations that are part of that alliance. It's fabulous to be really working towards that goal of elevating women in the industry together.
Agreed, Rachel. And part of what I have loved about the journey with you is how we share similar mindsets in terms of having realistic goals and working towards those to make sure that we can actually hit some of those achievements together.
Yeah, absolutely. So to get us started, what is the red thread throughout your travel and hospitality career?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Rachel. I think it's a really good question, and it's one that required me to reflect a little bit. And if I may, I want to tie it into HSMAI, which is the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association, because it has been a very big connector in my career. So if I may, I wanted to start out with a story because early on in my career, I sat in a sales leadership event, and the woman who was leading the event made us all stand, and we had to engage in this chant of people do business with people they know and like. And we went on and had to repeat it over and over. Now, I'm an introspect by nature, so this put me into an uncomfortable situation, sort of standing up and then engaging in this kind of behavior. But over the 40 years I've been in this industry, I will tell you this is a lesson that has stuck with me throughout. And HSMAI has been a very important part of establishing that ability to connect with the community of sales and marketing leaders that have been so important to my growth, because the relationships that I was able to learn, grow, and be part of through HSMAI have been this powerful connector for me. I've found peer mentors, I've had educational community, and it has allowed me to straddle lots of different dimensions of my career. So when I think about that red thread, I always put HSMAI at the beginning because it has introduced me to people I never would have had the privilege of meeting through any other way. And we were all like-minded in terms of really trying to power the future of people that drive top line in the business and had shared experiences, but often had challenging situations that we were able to learn from each other and support each other through some of those difficulties that we all face in our career.
Well, it speaks to that idea of community, right? With the shared, like you said, with people who have shared experiences and mindsets, for sure. How have you carried that sense of community on into your work and your career?
Well, for me, when I think about the sense of community, I realize that ability to relate to others has been a real driving force for me. And when I think about all of the different roles that I've had in the industry, because I've worked for REITs and I've worked for management companies, I've worked for brands, and I've actually worked for people that actually own hotels. And again, I had an early experience with probably my second job in the industry where an owner shared with me about the breakfast plate story, which I know is a very common thread for many, but he talked about the bacon and the egg being on the plate. And he very clearly identified that he was that bacon, he was the pig, and that he owned the asset, where I was the chicken and represented the egg, where I was involved in supporting his asset. So that combined with kind of the experiences I had at HSMAI, Rachel, it really showed me that role that I was here to support others in terms of achieving whatever their business goals were. And I developed up a tremendous respect for people that owned real estate, because they are taking an enormous bet in terms of making that investment in the business. And for me, that, again, it was that red thread that my job was to help them really achieve the commercial goals that they had, but understanding how much they had put into that investment and what it was their family's future, it was their personal future. So that story of the bacon plate, the chicken and the egg on the breakfast plate, and then this understanding of how relationships really power our future, those were kind of those elements that really helped guide my career.
Yeah. Well, that resonates a lot with me as a hotel owner. I have one asset, but there's for sure a lot of sleepless nights regarding that asset. And, it's so refreshing to hear that mindset about coming from that supportive role. I experience that now with the management company we work with. And it's an important mindset to have. And it's what really makes everything work together, for sure. So how would someone you work with describe you as a leader?
Well, it's an interesting time in my life, Rachel, because I have moved from actually, powering large teams, working with large organizations, to now I'm an independent consultant. So I'm in a very different stage of my life. But I would say that most people, if they were characterizing me, I think the first word they would use is driven, because I have a very results-oriented mindset. I'm very achievement-oriented. And part of that has to do, I think, with just the way my life, how I started, because I'm an only child of older parents that made a very deliberate decision to have a child in their late 30s. They were lower middle class. They put a lot of energy and effort, and obviously expectations associated with that. So I've always wanted to drive results. So I think if you ask most people, they would say that I have a very strong approach to understanding what expectations are and making sure that I deliver on those. And I would say the other piece, I'm sorry, my dogs are.
That's okay.
The other piece that people would characterize me is just my relationship focus, and that I do fundamentally believe in working with others and hopefully being a good listener and trying to form strong teams in terms of approaching how to get things done. So I think those would be the two characteristics that people would always describe me as being someone who's focused on getting results, and then also focused on working with others to be very inclusive in achieving those results together.
Yeah. Now that you bring up that concept of relationships, I just want to tie it back to, for a minute, to HSMAI, because, I think it's a two-way thing, right? Like a community, you can have the structure of a community organization like HSMAI, but it really never creates those long-lasting relationships. So it's also about the people. It has to draw the right type of people. So you have probably been influencing HSMAI as much as it has been influencing you. And that probably is what makes it very special.
Well, I truly believe that, relationships are like bank accounts. I've always believed in that Stephen Covey principle that we make deposits and withdrawals. So I would hope that that is the way people would see me with HSMAI, Rachel, because it truly has been one of the most important organizations that I have been affiliated with my career. So I have always tried to invest in the organization and with many of the people that I have come to not only respect and like. Many, I would say it's a much deeper relationship than that. So I hope I've made as many deposits in individuals in the organization's bank account as they have made in me.
Yeah. Wonderful. So speaking of the HSMAI, recently the State of Talent report came out, and I believe you were the author of that report and spent a lot of work researching and getting that ready. And in that report, you talk about the strengths of different generations in the workforce. And that relates to one of the questions that I like to ask is about what are your unique strengths? And how do you relate that to the multi-generational differences that you saw in your research?
Yeah, so there's two things I would offer back, Rachel. One is that this demographic, this macro trend that we have that, I know Luz and Mirka spoke about health span, but that is a permeating force that the time that we're going to be on this earth has been lengthened considerably because of health span. So when we look at sort of the Gen Alphas or the Zillennials, they probably are going to hit well past 100. In fact, some are saying as many as 120 years. So when I think about how long we're going to be here, and when we think about what our life purpose might be and how we're going to contribute, I do think this whole concept that Chip Conley has brought forward, which is this concept of wisdom workers, when we reach sort of those more mature aspects of our career, that's the value creation that we bring. And that's kind of how I characterize myself, because for someone that has been in the industry for 40 years, I've seen quite a bit. I think I have a pretty good understanding of a lot of the ways that success is driven in the business. But I also think I bring a lot of people leadership kind of learnings that allow people to navigate in terms of how to really develop teams and how to hopefully bring the best out of everyone. When I think about the state of talent, I do think we're on a different the artificial intelligence, there's lots of things that are really going to upend the way the world develops business and how we are going to be efficient and really grow and learn in terms of our applications. So when we think about what the AI force is and this macro trend of lifespan and health span being considerably extended, I think this is where we have to think about our talent in a very different way. So when I think about 5 generations in the workforce, I think it's really how do we continue to learn from each other and grow in terms of how we mentor each other. But I also think it is about this extended career path that many are going to have. Some it's financially driven, because when we think about when retirement was originally cast and we think about sort of our pension mindset, most of that was done with the thought that most people wouldn't hit 65. And now the reality is that people are going to potentially have 30 years in that period of time. So I think there's a financial drive that people are going to need to earn. But I also think it's that purpose that people need to contribute. So this element of how to bring the best out of everyone when we think about the Gen Zers, because they are so purposeful and mindful about their expectations. But we also think about some of the baby boomers and some of the learnings that they can impart. And I do love the way Chip Conley has really framed that up, and how he worked with Brian Chesky when Brian was building the Airbnb, and how Chip brought his wisdom of all of the work that he had done through Joie de Vivre and really helped Brian and a lot of Brian's teammates at Airbnb in terms of understanding the business and how to really drive some of those commercial outcomes and really leverage some of the opportunities in different ways.
Yeah. No, it's really mind blowing, like the range of generations we now are starting to find in the workplace. And, I'm also seeing this revived energy in someone that you might think is ready to retire because, everyone says 65 is the retirement age, but really there's such a big portion of the population who's actually ready to launch into almost a third or fourth chapter and, reinvent themselves in that portion of their life. And they still have so much to contribute and, to provide from all of that experience that you spoke of. But do you have some more specific ideas? Like how do we bring that together in a value creating way within organizations?
Well, I think organizations have to reevaluate in terms of how to make the best out of each generation's contributions. And then also because, as you pointed out, Rachel, the fastest growing segment in the labor force right now is at 65 plus, and it's expected to bridge into the 75 plus framework. So wow. I do think there's a lot of pieces that we have to think about. One is how many hours do people want to work? And what do they want to contribute? So I do think we have to take that marketing mindset when we think about our talent pool and really be better listeners and understanding in terms of what their needs and wants are so that we can leverage the best that they can bring to the workplace. So I think that's one thing. But I also think this nature of understanding that this concept of fractional and gig labor, which of course is something that is in the HSMAI report, a lot of that is driven by individuals wanting to be independent contributors in terms of how they can bring things to the workplace. So I just think we have to be better listeners and we have to be more committed to talent in terms of, as I said, that marketing mindset and understanding what their needs are, just as we have with customers for years. And I love listening to some of the Gen Zs because when I did some of the interviewing, I just remember this one woman who, was incredibly powerful because she stated about, this whole just kind of debunking some of the myths of young people not wanting to be in the office and, that they don't have that same commitment to work and contributing and all of those kinds of things. And she said, we want to be in the office and we want to be big contributors. But the point is we don't want to be in the office if there isn't any real value to being in the office. So they are not going to join in an office environment if simply they're going to be on Zoom calls all day. They want to be in an office that is going to drive some of their personal growth and their opportunity to collaborate with others. So it's this concept of leadership being far more accountable and far more intentional about what they want to achieve, and then making sure that they have a plan to really develop and get the best out of everyone in that workplace.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought up that point. You and I saw you at Alice on a panel, moderating panel, and hybrid work came up actually. And, the verdict's still out. I mean, especially on, not so much on hybrid work, but complete remote work. And I think that point that you brought up about, what's the value we're trying to create? I think sometimes we get caught up in this discussion with remote and in-office work about the policies and, just into the semantics of it and all of that, rather than thinking from a purpose-driven manner. Like, okay, what's our goal here? And what's the best way for us to work together to achieve that goal? And sometimes that's absolutely in person. And sometimes it might be for someone to be able to have quiet time and focus time in a different location.
Totally agree with everything that you said, Rachel. And that is that concept in my mind in terms of this mindset that some baby boomers have to shift from. But some of the things that I loved when I was doing this research report for HSMAI is the intentionality of some organizations actually building in collaboration days or team days where they became far more intentional of setting aside time for informal kinds of team conversations, as well as those formal kinds of things. The other aspect that I would offer in the talent report for me was that some organizations have a very strategic approach to the growth mindset that they're trying to nurture and foster in their teammates. And they do have a very intentional plan that those that commit to really growing and collaborating and participating in those kinds of team opportunities is going to power their career. So that's a part that I think, and if I may offer one additional point of view, I'm a Canadian by birth. There was a recent article in the Globe and Mail about career forward mindset. And that is this intentionality of people really thinking through their career and being very thoughtful about the purpose of what they want to achieve in individual roles and in the workplace environment. So I think employees are needing to do that, but I also think the employer needs to think about that in terms of how do they, again, get the best opportunities from all of their employees and really benefit from the diversity of thought of having 5 generations in the workforce, and how that collaboration can really help them achieve pretty significant outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll come back to more about HSMAI and the talent report, but switching gears a little bit in the meantime, could you tell us any stories or experiences that have shaped who you are today?
Well, I shared with you initially, being an only child of older parents certainly created that achievement mindset for me at a young age, because I wanted to fulfill on their expectations. But I would offer 2 other experiences for me that I think really were important in terms of shaping my mindset. One is I immigrated from Canada to the US. I did that in my 30s as a young mother. And I think for me, that was a very transformational growth opportunity, because when you make an immigration decision, you arrive in a country, you really don't have much in terms of credibility. When you arrive here, you don't have any kind of ability to get a mortgage, a car loan, any of those kinds of things that you might have had a lot of comfort with in your home country. So
Sure.
That is a very humbling experience. Going through the whole immigration process itself is somewhat humbling. So I think for me, that was a major reset in terms of my mind. And most people say that when you immigrate, it takes you about 3 years before you really become culturally adept. And I think that's very true, because I do think you have to learn a new culture. And even though many people would think Canadians and Americans are very similar, I would say there are enough differences that really force
Sure.
a different mindset. But why I think that was so transformational for me, Rachel, is I think it made me a better global executive, because that humbling experience of being an immigrant and having to do this major mindset reset, and then also a major self-awareness reset, I think it made me far more understanding of working with people in other countries and being far more respectful of their perspectives. So I think it enabled me to become a better global leader. And I think the other major transformation for me was as a parent. I had a son who is seriously dyslexic. In fact, some psychologists he was a very intelligent child, so he was able to bridge a lot of the gaps that he was 10 years old before they were even able to diagnose his dyslexia. But for me, who was always a pretty good student and found learning to be very easy, to go through that journey as a parent, I know you know this well, but there is nothing you would never do for your child. So I think going through that and understanding from his point of view that reading was never going to be his best skill set, which it was for me, but he learned through other ways. So I think understanding that learning journey from a very personal mindset made me a much better leader, a much more tolerant individual, and understanding the diversity, the neurodiversity that many people bring to the workplace, and hopefully being able to leverage some of those talents from others in a different way.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing from those examples is how those experiences really allowed you to kind of put yourself in somebody else's shoes, see things from different perspectives, which is absolutely relevant. I mean, in hospitality, where we are working with so many people from different countries and different cultures, I can imagine that has been a very useful set of life lessons to have, for sure.
I think for sure coming out from a country like Canada into the US, because there's so many things I admire about Americans, Rachel, and that Americans think big. They take much bigger risks than anywhere else in the world. And I have great admiration for that. But then understanding that that isn't necessarily the way everyone else's culture really thinks about things, it has allowed me to sort of be able to bridge some of those gaps in different ways.
Yeah. Well, I could say from my own experience, I am American, but I lived in the Netherlands for 9 years and returned in 2011. It was almost like also moving fresh to a new country. And that I remember that process. I was also in my early 30s, young mother, and that process of like relearning what it was like to live in the United States. It's definitely a transition that has to happen.
It is.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing those stories. Can you describe a time when you felt most alive or fulfilled?
Yeah, so part of the journey on self-awareness, I think, as you go through as a leader, Rachel, you become much better informed on those kinds of things that really give you joy in life. And so I'm very much of an ideas person. I love to learn, and I love to influence outcomes because I try to connect dots and see things from a strategic point of view. So I had a long career with Best Western. I was a global CMO and SVP of sales for a long time there. And I will tell you, the most impactful part of my career there was when we went through this path of really taking a singular brand and dividing it up into different brands under that company portfolio. And it was a really tough journey because it's an association. Even though it looks like it's a franchise business, it is a member-based association where hoteliers have pretty significant voices in shaping the direction of the business. And this decision to think about the brand in a different way was a transformational change in direction. And we had done all kinds of research with our hoteliers and we had done all kinds of research with our customers. But the part that I would tell you has always stuck with me is that one of the customers in the focus group said Best Western was the Forrest Gump analogy. It was like, it's like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what flavor you're going to get. And I knew, because I had a very close working relationship with David Long, who was our CEO of the business, obviously. And I just said to him, I felt that we were at this pivotal point in Best Western's history that if we couldn't change the direction and create the segmentation strategy, that the relevancy of the brand would be severely impacted. And I didn't think as a marketer that I would actually be able to be successful for the future. So for me, what was so impactful about that opportunity, which gave me so much joy, was one, being able to influence and take a legacy brand and actually shape the direction in a different way, because it's an association. Every member hotelier voted on that change. Wow. And I would tell you, 2 weeks before the ballot was coming due, I was in my office every day for 14 or 15 hours dialing members to try to make that business case. And for many of them, the thread that we talked about earlier, Rachel, that came back to me is many hoteliers said to me, Dorothy, I don't know about this change, but I trust you. So I will vote yes because I believe in you. And that was that currency of relationships and people believing, because people do business with people they know and like. And that's where trust is formed. And so for me, when I go back and think about what was most impactful, it was the influencing opportunity for a legacy brand, but it was also the influencing opportunity of bringing a lot of these asset owners that I truly respected and had great affection for to take us into that next journey of our future together. So that has been something I would say has always stood with me, that it was an opportunity that transformed my career and my learning journey.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, I actually got goosebumps when you honed in on the idea of trust, because I think that is just so huge. It's not just about the relationship, but the depth of that relationship and creating that culture of trust with people around you. I want to tap into that a little bit. How do you think that leaders can do a better job of developing that trust in their relationships?
I think it really is that journey of listening, Rachel, and trying to understand what is important to others. And when I think about my time at Best Western, I had an owner's mindset. It was that breakfast plate story that I always respected these individuals that were putting their life in our hands because it was their business that was part of the brand. And so I always tried to deliver value back to them, but part of understanding was trying to understand what was important to them in terms of the revenue contribution and bringing forward what they needed to do to be really supportive in their commercial strategies and growing customers. So it comes back to that fundamental of having respect for people, trying to understand their needs and wants, and then trying to deliver on that expectation back to them. So I think it's pretty simple stuff. It's the stuff we learned early on in life, but it's that Stephen Covey framework about understanding relationships or bank accounts. So my job was to put deposits in all of those owners' bank accounts from both the commercial side, but it was also on that relationship side that I understood and wanted to make them successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that relates already a lot to my next question around values. But what are some other kinds of principles that you stand for in your life and work?
Well, I will tell you that my journey in terms of my commitment to uplifting others is something that is really important to me, Rachel, and it's really important to me at this point in my life. I will tell you, I do consider myself a feminist, but I hope I'm also an inclusive feminist in that we all have to bring everyone with us as we try to shape that journey and being realistic about the goals that we want to achieve. As a mother of a son, I want him to be as successful as all of the women in my life as well. But I do recognize that I want to be a strong advocate for women getting their rightful seat at the table and their voices being adhered to. And also thinking about some of the systemic biases that we have to think about women and leaders in leadership roles differently than men. They are not going to do it the same way, but they are going to bring exceptional value in being their authentic selves in that role. So when I think about what I stand for today, I hope it is about inclusivity, but it's really bringing all of those voices together and supporting and uplifting others. That is my job as someone in my 60s now, that I want to help others achieve their dreams and goals. And I want to be a strong advocate to ensure they get there.
Yeah, I love that. That when this also relates back to some of the trends you talked about in the State of Talent report.
Unknown caller.
Gosh. No worries.
Sorry.
It's okay. What came up for me actually with a lot of those trends and diversity, equity, and inclusion was also, I think, one of the trends you talk about in the report, and the idea of inclusivity is that a lot of these trends go back to our values, right? Like whether it's hybrid remote work discussion, AI, multi-generational workforce, really values touches upon all of them in so many ways. Can you speak to, what from that angle, how do we kind of as leaders address some of those trends that you talked about in the report?
Yeah, well, I do think it comes down to some of the fundamentals of being a good human, Rachel, and being open to think differently. There's this report that was written, an HBR article more than a decade ago, that talks about sort of this journey that we've all been on, IQ being sort of what people used to think was the most important skill. And then we moved on to EQ, which was really your human skills, which hopefully brought your emotional intelligence forward. But today it's this CQ, which is your curiosity quotient, which is this learning journey that we all have to be on. And I do think that for me, this whole generational mindset of hopefully not getting stuck, because, part of the journey that I was on when I studied at school was really understanding cohort groups and people that are born within a 5-year range. We tend to have very similar ways that we see the world because we've gone through events at a similar point in our journey. But I do think being open to really thinking differently, and as I shared with you earlier, that when I listened to that Gen Z woman articulate her perspective in such a strong way that she said she wanted all of the same values that baby boomers want. It's just that don't put me in an office environment if there isn't going to be value to me. So
right.
I do think it's this mindset of being open to really listening to people and not getting stuck in the kind of values and beliefs that you might have held dearly for a long period of time. I think sometimes you have to shelve some of those things and be open to listening to others in a different way.
Right. Well, and the recognition and the acceptance that, I mean, things are always changing, and they're changing faster and faster than ever. And also that we may, when you have actually a values discussion, like you just pointed out, they may share the same values. They just may differ on how they are executed in terms of the practicality of certain things, certain office related workplace issues. So I think, what you're pointing out is going at some of those discussions. Well, where can we find commonalities on our values that actually might be able to help us have a conversation to move us forward?
No question. You said it beautifully, Rachel. I can't add anything further to that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. So are there I was actually really, just with the report, I was really impressed at the breadth. I had said this before we got on the call, and how relevant it is for just the broader hospitality industry. I had not read the State of Talent report before, and I'm not as familiar with HSMAI. So maybe you could say something about that in terms of like kind of getting away from that perception that it's an organization and information that's only relevant for marketing and revenue management, for example.
Yes. Well, the State of Talent report was highly focused on the commercial leaders' understanding, because a lot of that work is above property. It's not necessarily at the unit level, Rachel. So I do think that there are some real differences in terms of the structure at a unit level versus the structure that happens above property at a management company,
sure,
REIT, or a brand. But I do think there are threads that are very relevant in terms of being mindful of how we need to be relevant to today's employee and really understand what they want. Is it a job? Is it a career? And if it is a career, how do we really propel them forward in terms of achieving their dreams? And I think, some of the joy that I had in writing that report with some of the case studies and working with a lot of great companies in terms of their intentionality of building out hospitality as a career destination. And I would call out MGM because for me, just going through that journey with Amanda Voss and some of the HR leaders in that particular company, I mean, obviously they are the largest hospitality employer, bar none, in the industry. But the fact that they really have built out a database so that employees can put their hand up and be very intentional. They may enter MGM with X, but their dreams might be X3 or 3X or 4X or 5X. But it is that whole understanding of recruiting from within, really building out intentional development plans for individuals and being very open to understanding upskilling and reskilling. Because part of the elements for me when I looked at some of the World Economic Forum and some of the other databases that says, yes, we're going to lose 95 million jobs in the next few years to AI, but we're going to create 87 million new jobs that we can't even imagine today. But that's that understanding that MGM has at the forefront in terms of reskilling and upskilling. So that if a Dorothy Dowling joins maybe with a high school education or maybe with something more, I can put up my hand and say, yeah, I want to be a commercial leader and I really want to grow in that path. So it's really then being very intentional about providing job experiences, educational opportunities to work in the industry in terms of some of the associations and the growth trajectory that they may afford. So they're really thinking about that growth journey with their employee base to really help them achieve their dreams. And that's where I personally think it applies not just to sort of commercial growth. it's everyone's career growth, because I do think everyone has dreams in terms of what they want their life to be and what they want their work to be. And I think that ability to allow individuals to advocate for themselves, to hopefully have others help advocate for themselves, but also to be very open to saying this person has the willingness factor to really drive their career forward. Because when I think about my early days, in the business, we always used to characterize ability and willingness. And in the hospitality industry, what I've heard over my many decades is they will take someone with willingness over ability any day of the week, because the person with willingness has a growth mindset and an intentional career path that they want to go down. And so you have the ability to grow that person and work with them to achieve their dreams. So that's the part that I would characterize. I do think that there's been a mental shift in terms of understanding the value that employees bring to the workplace, and us being far more focused on understanding them as an important part of our business success, and really honing our capabilities in helping them achieve their dreams, but also create the wins for the employer at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that's coming up for me also as it relates, I mean, you made the point that, the jobs that are being created are things that we can't even imagine. And so what's coming up for me is that we used to focus, it used to be very clear, like when you came into a business, you're on a particular path and it means that you need these very specific operational skills, right? Well, we can't even predict what those operational skills are going to be. So it makes it even more important to focus on more those other, I really don't want to use the word soft skills. I like to call them leadership competencies. Because I think that's what they are. Things like growth mindset, and listening skills, building relationships. Like these are all really, I think, underneath the drivers of growth for people. And you pointed out, I don't even think I had heard of this term before, but the leadership development plans. How do you think that plays into this as we move towards the future?
Well, leadership development plans, in the report that I did, of course, I interviewed some of the best hospitality companies or large hospitality companies that are very intentional about their employee base. And that is this whole element of developing up a very structured approach for their growth. And LDPs now, I think, are becoming far more important to organizations, because they're looking at different places that people are in their career and working on a lot of those leadership competencies that you referenced earlier, in terms of really developing those with coaching capabilities and could be group coaching as opposed to individual coaching. It is on that self-awareness journey, Rachel. So whether that is going down the path of strength finders or other kind of assessment tools, so that individuals become far more aware of their strengths and potentially their opportunities in terms of growth. But I do think that the best companies today, and it's not just big companies, they are really thinking about their employee base as being critical to their business success, and they want to build out these opportunities for individuals to develop. But part of that is that consultative approach in terms of really understanding what is it that they want, what is the dreams that they have, so that you can actually build those. Because the reality for me is understanding that all of that takes time. And so individuals have to take on those things when they have the ability and the time to really invest in making some of those time investments that they have to in terms of their growth. So some of it can be done on the job, but some of it is also things that one needs to invest in on one's personal time. So it's balancing all of that out. But I have seen that a lot of companies are doing this now, Rachel, and a lot of employees are becoming much more aware of it and advocating it for themselves. Yeah.
And it sounds like being more intentional about
it. Absolutely. It's that career forward framework.
Yeah, Absolutely. So we're about to come to the end of our show, but I have one more question for you today. What impact do you strive to have on the hospitality industry?
Well, there's two things that I'm highly focused on, Rachel. One is with our Women's Travel Alliance. I'm hoping that we can continue to remove some of the systemic challenges that are part of our industry and helping women really achieve some of their career aspirations and goals. But the other personal goal that I have is just uplifting others, because part of my journey, as I would say, as I moved, into this generation that I'm now part of now, is that I want to celebrate people's strengths and I want to affirm those strengths for them. And, many of us don't recognize some of the real brilliance that we bring. And so I hope that I can be one of those very positive voices in people's ears and complimenting people and really helping them, hopefully, to really take advantage of their brilliance. That's my dream.
Well, I can say in just even the most recent experience and time I've spent with you that you've certainly done that for me. So I very much appreciate that. I feel that very much from you.
Thank you.
So before we close, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience today?
The only thing I would ask is I hope that many will read the talent report. Rachel, HSMAI is very committed in terms of helping our industry, in terms of how do we really leverage the talent that we have within. So I'm hoping that they will. And I also hope that those companies that would like to be part of our case study report, because I have signed on to do the project again this year, that they will volunteer, because there's a lot of great learnings that I know through case studies just bring it home in a different way for individuals when they read these kinds of reports.
Yeah. And a plug for that, as a reader, I loved the case stories, the case studies. It just brings it more to life than the theory. So hopefully you'll get all those to agree to do it for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dorothy. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Until next time, I'm Rachel Vandenberg, and this is the Travel Leader Podcast.